Time Walk with Me.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Time Walk with Me. Today we're looking at yet another of my many EDH decks. This one is Morophon the Boundless. It is a sliver deck, so as you play Morophon, you're going to choose slivers. And so let's take a look at the cards in the deck. First we got Morophon the Boundless. Morophon is a 6/6 changeling that costs 7 mana to cast. That's 7 of any combination of colors. You choose a creature type when it comes into play, and then every creature spell of that type that you cast costs 1 of each color less. None of the slivers in this deck cost more than 1 of any color, so as long as Morophon is out, my slivers won't cost any colored mana. In fact, slivers without colored mana in their mana cost will be free. That's really good considering Morophon doesn't cost any colored mana itself. Oh yeah, and it also gives my slivers +1/+1. Next we have Sliver Queen. All hail the Queen of the Slivers. She's 7/7, she's free to cast, and 8/8 if you have Morophon out. And she pumps out 1/1 slivers for 2 mana, or 2/2 slivers for 2 mana if you have Morophon out. This is the only fake in this deck because it is not worth hundreds of dollars to me. But if you want to buy me one, I will be very grateful. I will be as grateful as I would be as if you would give me hundreds of dollars. Next we have the first sliver. It has Cascade, and it gives your other slivers Cascade. It's also free when Morophon is out, and the Cascade doesn't care if you didn't pay for the spell. Sliver Hive Lord. The sliver is good for making your slivers indestructible. It doesn't make them invincible, but it still makes them difficult to kill. It's especially good at making board wipes one-sided, which there are many in this deck. Cautery Sliver. Sacrificing slivers isn't ideal, but Cautery Sliver could come in handy if I really need to do some damage to something or prevent some damage. Fury Sliver. This dude gives all slivers double strike. This includes your opponent's creatures, but what are the odds that your opponents will also be playing slivers? They might have changelings. Maybe. I don't really see those too often, though. Sinew Sliver. This is a Sliver Anthem. They should make Anthem Sliver. Watcher Sliver. Watcher Sliver gives slivers a bigger butt. Sedge Sliver. This one is a conditional anthem, but it also gives slivers the ability to regenerate for a black mana. Cleaving Sliver. This is a counterpart to Watcher Sliver, but it only gives the bonus to my slivers. Virulent Sliver. This one could be Phyrexian Sliver. It makes all slivers give a poison counter whenever they deal combat damage. It applies to all slivers, which could be an issue, but it probably won't be. Megantic Sliver. This sliver makes only my slivers a lot bigger. Bladeback Sliver. If I can empty my hand, my slivers become pingers that can only target players and planeswalkers. Very good. Scuttling Sliver. With the ability to untap my slivers, I can attack a bit more freely. Spinneret Sliver. Spinneret Sliver does whatever a spider sliver does, and it makes the rest of my slivers do it too. Might Sliver. It makes all slivers bigger, so hopefully my opponents aren't using too many slivers themselves. Lancer Sliver. It's a little old-fashioned, but First Strike is a very handy ability, and still relevant, I think. Necrotic Sliver. Sliver decks can be vulnerable to spot removal, so you'll really only want to use this if your opponents aren't using slivers or changelings unless you make a deal with them. But really, do you want to play with the kind of people who would make a deal with a sliver player? Sidewinder Sliver. I always liked flanking. I also like how it's been so long since they've used this ability they needed to put in reminder text. Darkheart Sliver. I'm not likely to use this ability, but it's better to have it and not use it than to need it and not have it. It's also free when Morophon is out. Lymph Sliver. I think Absorb is one of those non-evergreen abilities that was put into a set but wasn't popular enough to continue with. It doesn't really help you to win, it just helps you not to lose, and I think abilities that just delay the inevitable aren't highly valued in Magic, but I think there is value in that. If my opponent is going to beat me, I don't want to make it easy on them. And who knows, the heart of the cards might turn things around for me with just a little delay. Cloud Shredder Silver. It's weird that this sliver gives flying but isn't blue. The haste makes sense since it's red, but flying doesn't really go with white. But I like color pie breaks. I think they should make a whole set where the colors don't match up with the card's abilities. This one is especially nice because it only affects my slivers. Winged Sliver. This one does exactly what it sounds like. It's blue, wings in the title, and it gives all slivers flying. Bone Splitter Sliver. This is like Cleaving Sliver, but it gives +2/+0 to all slivers. It also turns an army of 1/1s into a true threat. Crystalline Sliver. I think I paid a few bucks for this one. It gives all slivers Shroud, which is great spot removal protection. Reflex Sliver. I think when this one was made, haste hadn't quite made its way into red yet. The first card that gave haste to all creatures was Concordant Crossroads, and it's a green enchant world, so it's not so much a color pie break as it is a pre-color pie solidification anomaly. Steelform Sliver. This sliver makes up for its somewhat weak ability by not giving it to my opponent's slivers. More defense is not a bad thing. Toxin Sliver. Death Touch is a very black ability, so this one makes total sense. It's nice because it makes my opponents think twice before blocking and clears their board of creatures. Spiteful Sliver. This sliver combos perfectly with Sorrow's Path, and I just realized that Sorrow's Path isn't in this deck, nor is it in my rare binder, which means it's in another deck, which means it combos with something else as well. And that means I need another Sorrow's Path. Spiteful Sliver also pairs well with the next card on my list. Psionic Sliver. Psionic Sliver is based on a classic color pie break called Psionic Blast, a blue instant that deals 4 damage to any target and 2 damage to you. The sliver gives all slivers the ability to deal 2 damage to any target and 3 damage to themselves. This is where pumping up their defense comes in handy. Two-headed Sliver. Slivers are already pretty hard to deal with due to their numbers, but this makes them all harder to block. Homing Sliver. This Sliver Tutor turns all other slivers into Sliver Tutors. If I don't want to use my Necrotic Sliver, I can trade it in for a Sliver Queen, or whatever sliver gives me an ability that I need. Harmonic Sliver. This is another one that I want to be sure my opponents don't use against me. It can come in very handy, but it's a good candidate for sacrificing to Cautery or Necrotic Sliver if things go wrong. Game Trail Changeling. It's a changeling, so it's a sliver, but it keeps its trample to itself. But hey, that means I can sacrifice it without weakening my army. Irregular Cohort. This one is 2 changelings in 1, so if I have slivers that pump up my sliver's power, then that's all the more power on the board for just 4 mana. It's good value. Bloodline Pretender. Though it lacks evasion, this shapeshifter gets bigger with every sliver I put on the battlefield, and it does benefit from evasion granted by real slivers. Mirror Entity. Mirror Entity would be better if almost all of my creatures weren't already slivers, but it can turn an army into a really huge army, and that's generally a good thing. Vesuvan Shapeshifter. My Vesuvan Doppelganger is in another deck, so Vesuvan Shapeshifter will have to do. It can copy any creature on the battlefield, even my opponent's, and it can switch creatures at the beginning of my upkeep. Mythos of Illuna. This card is cool because it creates a copy of any permanent on the battlefield, even my opponent's Bolas's Citadel or Gilded Lotus. Clone. This can copy my opponent's Mons Goblin Raiders. That's amazing. Dax Duplicate. This is a redder version of Clone that benefits from attacking the player with the most life. Coat of Arms. This benefits everyone who is playing a tribal deck, but mostly it turns my army of slivers into a ridiculously huge army of slivers. Reflections of Litjara. This doubles my sliver spells. The legendaries die instantly, but most of the slivers in this deck are not legendary, so it's fine. Herald's Horn. This makes my slivers even cheaper to cast. It pairs nicely with Morophon, and it gives me more slivers to cast from the top of my library. Worn Power Stone. I don't care that it comes into play tapped, it's a good ramp card. Sisay's Ring. This is my favorite budget Soul Ring alternative for people like me who have more decks than they have Soul Rings. Migration Path. If you need 2 more lands, this is a handy spell. If you don't, you can cycle it away. Glittering Frost. This is good for ramp and color fixing, and since it's an enchantment on a land, it's harder to deal with than a mana rock. Grafted Growth. Just like with Glittering Frost, this is ramp and color fixing in a difficult to remove form. Ornithopter of Paradise. It's a flying mana rock, and it becomes a giant sliver with Mirror Entity. Sylvan Scrying. This one is nice because it allows me to search for any land, not just a basic. And for just 2 mana, I'm fine with the land just going into my hand. Urban Evolution. More lands on the battlefield and more cards in my hand are generally good things. Arcane Signet. Of course I put in Arcane Signet. Why would I not? Growth Spiral. 2 mana to draw a card and play an extra land is a good deal if you ask me. Cultivate. This is a great ramp spell that helps me not miss a land drop. Evolution Charm. This versatile spell is mostly meant to help me get the colors that I need, but it can also give me back a creature from the graveyard or give temporary evasion to a creature. Gift of Paradise. It's color fixing plus ramp that's hard to remove. Revivify. First you confuse your opponent by wiping the board, then scare them by bringing your Slivers back to life. Promise of Tomorrow. This is more board wipe protection. When this is out and a creature of mine dies, it gets exiled. Then when I'm out of creatures, Promise of Tomorrow dies and I get my creatures back. By invitation only. This is a cool board wipe that gets around both hexproof and indestructible, and I can tailor it to whatever size I need it to be. Cleansing Nova. This is another board wipe that can be tailored to the situation. Wrath of God. This is a classic board wipe that prevents creatures from using an outdated ability that was used quite a bit back in the day. The modern equivalent would be something that gets around indestructibility. Urza's Bauble. This is a good blank spot for a deck. It costs nothing, it gives me a little bit of intel on an opponent's hand, and it replaces itself. Eureka Moment. Card advantage plus more land is good. Naked Singularity. I have always liked this card. If any of my opponents are relying heavily on basic lands, this will probably disrupt them a lot while it's out, which won't be long due to the cumulative upkeep. Bloodfell Caves, nothing really to say about that. Litjara Mirror Lake, a land that copies a creature, is a pretty cool idea, I think. Tranquil Cove, Thornwood Falls, Opulent Palace, Frontier Bivouac, pretty self-explanatory. Secluded Courtyard. It's a command tower as long as I use it to cast sliver spells. Otherwise, the colorless mana is fine. It's nice that it doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. Arcane Sanctum. Command Tower. Of course I put in Command Tower into a 5-colored deck. Windscarred Crag, Kazandu Refuge. Archway Commons. It's a bit slow, but a mana of any color is very handy. Swiftwater Cliffs, Dismal Backwater, Exotic Orchard. Rupture Spire. It's a bit slow, but a mana of any color is very handy. Then we got Jungle Hollow, Scoured Barrens, and Blossoming Sands. And then we've got at least one land of every basic type. Only one swamp. Then we got 3 islands, 3 mountains, 4 forests, and 4 plains. And that is it. That is my Morophon, the Boundless deck. What do you think? Tell me what you think, especially if you think that it's a good deck. I especially want to hear that. I'll see you later.